bacteria, and trying to give those to a patient to trigger the secondary response. So not to trigger the first response because there is no infection. Really, hopefully there is no infection. But we are hopefully trying to trigger that secondary response. So we're trying to build the B cell line. We're activating some CD4 helper cells, but we're trying to build that B cell line. And when we build those B cells, basically what we're doing is we're trying to build antibodies. So her work along with her team was really amazing that they were thinking about an mRNA vaccine, but the reason that the mRNA vaccine is a little bit better than a vaccine that is just like a conjugate, which is just like a piece, is because it'll get inside the cell and the viral pieces will get inside the cell. So yes, we're building our B cell line, but also we're building our CD8 line. So if that cell has some sort of infection, then the body will be able to recognize that we have those CD8s. If we have those pieces, then it'll build the CD4s. If we have those pieces, it'll build the B cells. So we're building a really robust secondary response by using mRNA instead of just a conjugate. So the conjugate vaccines that they had tried, they try and error all kinds of things. They tried conjugate they've been trying to do vaccines for the common cold since the beginning of vaccines. And we haven't ever found anything that works. But remember, coronavirus is the same thing that causes the common cold, it's just a different strain. So maybe we're closer to curing the common cold. Maybe, we will be able to develop mRNAs rapidly enough to where we could build vaccines against all kinds of things that we never thought we'd be able to vaccinate against. So, I would imagine she might get the Nobel Prize, but I don't know, but it's very cool. Okay, so we're moving on to the nervous system today, but let's finish talking about the integumentary system, and then we're gonna do a little group practice. Maybe before the other students get here, you guys will be a little more prepared than they are, just that you'll get a quick 2-minute rundown. Yeah?
How does our note cards and DDX come together? Are they gonna are these gonna be are we tested separately?
No, no and yes. So the note cards, usually what I do, so any organism that's on your note card and any information on the back is fair game. So that's if I'm gonna give you something like, this is a picture, what is this? Well, this is MRSA. So then you have to know it's Staph aureus, and then anything about Staph aureus that we had to learn.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I did in the past, which I made a mistake a couple semesters ago, is I nested the questions. So I'd ask here's the picture of MRSA, what is this? And then all of the things that are associated with that. But I stopped doing that because if somebody didn't get MRSA, they got all these wrong. Yeah, so I stopped doing that. So hopefully it should be where if you don't recognize what it is or if you don't remember, you should still be able to answer the note card question. So
okay.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so just quick run through, everybody peek up here really quickly because this is gonna be your little challenge you guys are gonna do together today. This is MRSA, Staph aureus. That's how we test for Staph aureus. That's what we treat with Staph aureus. Here's a maculopapular rash. It's a confluent, small little tiny bumps. There's no fluid in there. There's 3 different organisms that have confluent rashes: measles virus, rubevirus, which is, or you can remember measles, rubella, roseola. Measles, rubella, roseola. Measles, more severe. A lot of people are vaccinated against it, so we don't worry about it that much, but it is coming back around. And then Koplik spots are something we would look for, and not every patient will have those, but if your patient does have that, it's a good sign your patient has measles. Very scary, CDC involved, all that kind of stuff. Rubella is very, very minor measles, but we vaccinated against it anyway. And then roseola is, almost everyone has had it, all children have had it. It's a type of herpes virus. It's a maculopapular rash. Here's impetigo, what impetigo looks like. It's honeycolored, bacterial infection, strep pyogenes and staph aureus. These are our two main, you'll see these over and over again. So it might be a good idea to make a strep pyogenes, staph aureus list to help you with like what could be those two, 'cause those two come up again and again. Highly contagious, common in children, flaky honey-colored topical antibiotics. Cellulitis, so this is what cellulitis looks like. It's actually way more common than you think it is. A lot of patients actually will come in with cellulitis. And usually you give them oral antibiotics if you're afraid that it's like this one is a very severe cellulitis. Sometimes it'll just be of one small area. Oh, actually, no, I don't wanna say that, never mind. So cellulitis is, over a big, large area, they probably get this for IV antibiotics. But oral, if it's caught early, so this is strep and staph again. Good prognosis unless it's in the bloodstream. When it's in the bloodstream, they'll have neurological symptoms or fatigue, fever, things like that if it's in the bloodstream. If it's localized, they won't have any of those. Sometimes they might have a mild fever, but usually because there's some sort of pyrogens running around, but if it's bacteremia, then you know it. Yeah.
This is probably a dumb question.
Yeah,
But
no,
does
no
that have
questions.
anything to do with kinkles? Like the.
No, that's what I have. No, it's not a dumb question. No, I think people just say that it's like big ankles. My sisters and I always say we're happy with kinkles because we're runners, and so we don't get sprained ankles very often, so we're always proud of our kinkles. But yeah, no, it just means like a person with bigger ankles. Yeah.
But it's not like a disease at all?
No, yeah. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
like I was born that way. Like, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was
yes, that's okay.
Someone
No,
I used to work
this
with.
is the place to ask it,
had really bad
always.
kinkles.
Yes. No, I just, I'm 10 feet, I just have big feet and big ankles. I'm
Oh, I have
actually
this, like,
like,
disorder
I'm
where I
happy
have,
about
like,
it, cause I am a runner, and so I never sprain my ankle.
There is.
We're always been like, just own it. Okay, so Staphylococcus scalding skin syndrome is obviously just staph. No, this is the place to ask questions like that. Like, you know, all of us hear weird things all the time. You know, there's one show that I love so much where she was like, no, it's from this there was like a bunch of unicorns, and they were like, did you not know like unicorns are not real? And she's like a horse with a horn? No, there's horses with horns. They're like, no, there are no horses with horns. Like, so, you know, people just like learn different stuff in different places, and we might as well just like come out with it. If you've heard something, you know, everybody will have heard something different, so it's good to get it out there. You know, this is the best conversation that I have is in my Bio 100 class when we start talking about repro, because the amount of women in the class that don't know, like if you put a picture of a vagina, they don't know where it is. They know where their own vagina is, but like not the anatomy. You would be surprised how many people do not know their own anatomy of like where things are. So it's a cool thing to just like, this is the class, just get it out. Like, where is the cervix? What is the cervix? Where is the uterus? What is the uterus? Where are the vas deferens? What is a prostate? You know, all that kind of stuff. So we talk about that a lot in my class. So just any questions you have, they're all on the table. Okay, so highly virulent, rare Staphylococcus scalding skin syndrome. This is a vesicular rash that has fluid in it, that has clear fluid. So it's non-pustule, there are no neutrophils involved in these vesicular rashes. So this is chickenpox or the shingles, chickenpox, varicella zoster virus, varicella zoster. It's a type of herpes virus, yeah.
I remember there being fluid when I scratched my chicken pox.
It's clear fluid.
Oh, okay.
It's not infected, it's not full of neutrophils.
Okay.
It's clear fluid, yeah. So a type of herpes virus, that means it's a provirus, so that's something, a good little thing. I think all of these are so good to start pulling back up that information for the finals. And I'm not gonna ask you about all of this stuff, I'm gonna keep it very simple. I'll show you today, kind of like examples of what I would ask you. But it's a great time because these are the questions that I'll ask on the final is like, your patient has this is what you would look for. And so it will help you like, oh, what is a live attenuated vaccine? Oh yeah, you're gonna treat with IV antibiotics. What are my antibiotics? So it's a good chance to review. I'm not gonna ask you that, but centripetal is, so smallpox are usually, and smallpox I won't ask you about smallpox, you'll never see smallpox, but it's usually on the extremities where centripetal is like, the maculopapular rashes or vesicular rash are usually like more towards the core. Yeah.
So the varicella zoster virus leads to the chickenpox immediately afterward, which lasts 4 to 7 days, but then that is latent in the body for like years usually before the shingles come out, and then those last when you have them 2 to 4 weeks.
So yes, they can last 2 to 4 weeks. So chickenpox can last 4 to 7 days. Shingles can last 2 to 4 weeks. They're the same virus. One is we just call it that for some reason. Kids we call it chickenpox, adults we call it shingles, but it's the same virus.
It's usually like a really long period in between. It's not often that you get one and then the other.
Yeah, I don't know that much about that, but I don't know at what age we call it shingles and why we call it shingles. I don't know that. That's a good question because that will come up for sure. Yeah.
So I don't know why exactly, but if you get the varicella vaccine, like the 2-thing vaccine, that doesn't protect you against shingles.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Why? Since it's the same virus.
Yeah, I don't
Weird,
know
right?
that. I think it's something happens in adults where it changes.
Is it because it's an attenuated vaccine and so the vaccine has like
Yeah.
a lifespan?
I thought you
might
could
be.
also only get shingles if you had chickenpox before.
That's true.
Yeah. But you can get shingles. Can you get shingles if you've had the vaccine?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get shingles
But
if you've had the vaccine.
From what I've like understood, you can only get shingles if you've had chickenpox. And if you got the vaccine and you've never had chickenpox, and you couldn't get shingles, because shingles is a variation of chickenpox.
Right.
I think that the
Yeah, let's
person
look it
I
up.
knew had chickenpox, then got the vaccine, then developed shingles later.
I think that
Yeah.
maybe happened.
I'm going to put that on my to-do list because I definitely want to look that up. I'm not really 100% sure those differences, but we'll talk about it. Okay, so these are pustular. These actually have pus inside of them, or sometimes it's called purulent. And this is, they're filled with pus. If they're filled with pus, you have 2 options. One is 1,000 million times more likely is folliculitis. That's Staph aureus. You can get that in the follicles, hair follicles, especially like in hot tubs, the hair follicles, this, your pores will open more in a hot environment, and so the Staph aureus can get in there, but also from shaving. So usually a topical antibiotic, but leishmaniasis would be really common in an area that has the sand fleas that have leishmania in it. So usually there'd be like outbreaks, and these outbreaks, they have large pustular skin lesions 100 times over what folliculitis would look like. So it is a good idea to also your Staph aureus of like folliculitis, cellulitis, like a MRSA pustule infection, what that would look like. So looking at all those things separately. Yeah.
So if we would like get a photo of one of these, would we and ask like, hey, what is this? Would you say this is a pustular, or would we want to be more specific and be like, this is?
I would probably give you something that more looks like this.
Okay.
That looks like pustules. So you
Okay,
can
well-
tell it's pus versus serous fluid like this.
But would the answer be one of the diseases or the segment disorder?
It could be either or. So it could be is this purulent or non-purulent? Is it pustular or vesicular? Is it Staph aureus or is it leishmania?
Okay.
Would we have to
Yeah.
distinguish between folliculitis and?
No, but folliculitis I always put, even though it's not always super clear that it's associated with the hair follicle, but I would always put that associated with the hair follicle, so you'll know folliculitis, that makes sense.
How would you tell if it's leishmaniasis?
So leishmania will look like, so if I did ask you the difference between these, it would be, I would make it associated with the hair follicle.
Okay.
Yeah, so then you'd know it's folliculitis. Okay. So here, this one, I put this one on there, here's all the follicles, even though some of these aren't pustular, but they, as it develops, they do get more pustular, but I'll make it very, very clear. Yeah?
How do folliculitis come process when bacteria gets
Yeah, that's a good question. So, they would survive the high heat, maybe if it's not hot enough. And then also sometimes they're just, like cesspools for other, like bacteria that can live in higher heat. Yeah. But, yes, it is semi-common from hot tubs. Yeah, good question though. Okay, so here's the ones we haven't covered yet, but we've already covered these. So, hopefully this will help because we've already covered all the mycoses of the body. So this is just a review. Let me get my little thing out because I hate being stuck up there. Okay, so we have all of the mycoses. So this is all the tinnias. So remember we've talked about all the tinnias before, so let's go through them again. Okay, so we have, remember these are caused by the dermatophytes. So this was one of our note cards. Microsporum, epidermophyton, trichophyton. These are all fungi. One thing actually I wanted to bring up really quick is that plantar warts, you might think it's a fungus, right? If it's like a wart on the foot or even warts on the hands, they're not a fungus, they're usually a virus, and it's usually a strain of human papillomavirus or HPV. It's not a fungus. And then also another thing that's kind of tricky is ringworm. Ringworm is not a worm, it's a fungus, even though it's called ringworm. Yeah?
Are the dermatophytes, since the first letter is not capitalized, does that mean that those are the
No,
species names?
they should be. It's,
Oh.
yeah, they should be. Those are all the genus, and then there's several species. Yeah. Okay, so, there's tinea capitis, is the calf, scalp. Tinea corporis is on the body, that's ringworm. Tinea unguium, or also called onychomycosis, which I know it's annoying, but I want you to know both of those because those will come up again and again because it's so common. Now you'll notice, if you ever see people like checking out at a grocery store, you'll see them in their nails, you'll notice it now more and more. So if you ever just keep your eyes out and you'll see people with it because it's extremely common, especially if you do end up getting pedicures, you'll see people with it. It's common. So tinea unguium or onychomycosis is of the nails. That's the yellow thick nails. That's from the dermatophytes. Tinea cruris is jock itch, is usually of the I don't really wouldn't know why would they call it ringworm versus they would call it cruris, but usually they can't even call tinea cruris jock itch, but it can be under the armpits. Usually it's like a wet, moist, dark area that people don't dry. Tinea pedis is athlete's foot. That's extremely common as well. Topical antifungals is usually the option. Okay, so our last ones are diseases of the eye. So this is, the only one is conjunctivitis, which is a good review also for the final. So this is no new information from the final. We're not gonna memorize any of the organisms. We're just gonna know if it's bacterial, it's purulent, if it's viral, it's serous. So it's clear, bacterial, viral, bacterial. So in neonates, one other thing that it can be gonorrhea or chlamydia, remember, because those can be transferred as the patient goes out of the vagina if the patient has it. But also Staph aureus is a common conjunctiva, epidermitis, now you guys know a little bit more about what that is. Pyogenes, Haemophilus influenza, Moraxella, there's a lot of different bacteria that can cause an infection of the conjunctiva of the eye. It's like the covering of the eye. And then viral can be adenovirus, but also it can be varicella zoster virus or some sort of herpes virus. But I don't want you to memorize any of those either. All you have to know is if it's bacterial or viral, it's purulent or serous. Yeah.
For the final exam, you know when we memorize for the midterm with all the viruses and bacteria?
Yeah.
Like varicella zoster virus, would that be something that is 100% we should know for the final as well?
So what you have to know for the final as far as that goes is how to categorize each thing. So if I said, I couldn't say virus, it would tell you what it is, but if I said varicella zoster, you'd have to know that's a virus versus a bacteria. So that's kind of the section how, yeah, so I want you to be able to like any of the diseases to be able to say if it's bacterial, viral, fungal, protozoal, helminth. Am I missing any? So be able to tell which is which for the final. For this, you'd be able to say like my patient is 5 years old. They have a serous conjunctivitis. Then you'd say, oh, it's serous conjunctivitis, it's viral. But I would never say what organism is that because I don't want you to memorize all of those. It can be kind of anything, so there's not really a specific. If there was one specific, I would have you guys remember that, but there's kind of a lot. So know if it's viral or bacterial for conjunctivitis. Yeah.
Are there other eye infections that we're not learning for the sake of the class that
Yeah.
we would need to know, or is this?
You will, there are other infections that, like, people can get an infection in the tear duct. Yeah, there's a few things in the eyes. I don't know very much about eyes. It's like very limited to what I know about it, but there are definitely other ones.
This is one of those cases though, like, I'm forgetting off the top of my head that some of the other things we've covered where conjunctivitis is, like a pneumonia, for example, where it's like the name of an infection of the region rather than the name of a specific infection caused by a specific organism.
Yes.
So anything that would affect the conjunctiva would be called conjunctivitis, and that's why it's caused by those things. Okay.
Yes, yeah, and that gets confusing, because you're like, well, are you talking about MRSA? You're saying methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, but you're also talking about the infection. Versus here, you're talking about conjunctivitis, which is an infection of the conjunctiva. Right, yeah, that does get confusing. Yeah.
Sorry, just to be clear, so this, we'd be asked if it's gonna viral or bacterial.
Yeah.
But if it were one of our, like, if it was the backside of the note card information, we should be able to say exactly what that.
Then it can cause conjunctiva, yeah,
Okay.
it can cause conjunctivitis, like Staph aureus. If it says eyes, yes.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll do more practice too, and hopefully we can, even I think it might be a good idea for us to do like a group powwow, and like, okay, like if it's a skin, what is it likely, what does it look like, just kind of practice. I think the more that you say these kind of things out loud, it really does help. But I can help you organize, maybe remind me at the end of class, and I can help you with how to organize each of the information, because I think that does get confusing, is how to organize it in your mind. Like, there's so much, like how to box it out, kind of. Yeah, so let's do that together. Okay, so that was it for this integument and eye. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna spend about 15 minutes, and we're going to do these together. So what I'm gonna have you guys do is, let's do partners, but what I want you to do is go meet up with somebody you don't know. So here's this, and here's this. So I am going to do so we have, go ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, so we'll have to have one group of 3. And how many of these do we have? 1, 2, 3, go find a partner you don't know. And sit together. Everybody kind of knows each other a little bit, but just make sure you introduce yourselves, that you know the other person. I'm gonna reorganize everybody for the next round. Okay, so we're just gonna try and blow through this as quick as we can until we have to go to lab. How many people are still working in lab? A lot, okay, awesome. Okay. So the central and peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cords. Your spinal cord is one. And then the peripheral nervous system are all of the nerves in the periphery. So in the arms and legs and the trunk, things like that. So the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is anything that's any of the nerves that are not a part of the brain and spinal cord. We're not going to cover anatomy very much, but these are the things you would just need to know as we're going into diagnostics of infections of the nervous system. So the blood-brain barrier has an extra thick barrier so that it's less likely for pathogens to break that barrier, but still some pathogens are able to get through the blood-brain barrier. There's also something called a placental blood barrier, and that placental barrier also is a very thick barrier that we don't want pathogens to be able to get to the fetus as well. So I don't want you to know anything about this, I just thought it was interesting. It kind of shows you how the, in the periphery versus in the blood-brain barrier, the difference between the periphery and the blood-brain barrier, and how less likely it is that pathogen can breach that barrier. So this is mostly what we're going to talk about is meningitis. Meningitis is an infection of the meninges. The meninges are these 3 layers. The mnemonic is PAD. It's a pad covering the brain. Pia, arachnoid, and dura, which I don't want you to know any of those either. But there's a subarachnoid space that carries cerebrospinal fluid, and if a bacteria or a virus or a protozoa or fungal spores or something gets into that cerebrospinal fluid and causes an infection, that's called meningitis. So we worry about meningitis a lot, actually, but I'll show you why we worry about it. But the cerebrospinal fluid goes around the brain and also around the spinal cord, and so I'll show you how we test if there's a pathogen in the meninges. So this is the spinal cord. This is a cross section of the spinal cord. So here's a picture of cerebrospinal fluid. So the fluid that encases the brain, there's fluid that encases the brain, but also there's fluid that fills up these open spaces in the brain. And those open spaces in the vein are called ventricles. And those ventricles, what they do is form like a little buoy so that the brain floats in the brain case. And the brain is actually, even though you see it and it looks like a rubber ball because those have been treated with formaldehyde, but the brain is actually incredibly soft. It almost falls apart if you're holding the human brain. It's very, very mushy and very flexible and bouncy. So any kind of movement or any kind of jarring can damage the brain. So that's why it's an extra protective layer for the brain to float in the brain case. But that leaves this cerebrospinal fluid vulnerable to infection. So if there's pathogens within the cerebrospinal fluid. So this is why when we're worried about meningitis, the patient will receive what's called a lumbar puncture. So they'll take a needle and inject the needle into where the cerebrospinal fluid exists and pull out the cerebrospinal fluid and test it just like we would test in the lab. Is it bacterial? Is it viral? And that's our 2 main things. Is it bacterial? Is it viral? Because they mean 2 totally different things. So we'll talk about meningitis, and then we're gonna run through some of these, and I'll tell you kind of, these I just want you to know the name of them and kind of what they are a little bit, but nothing too crazy. But you'll see these in the news, so I wanted to bring it up. Okay, so let's talk about meningitis. So the reason that I brought this up again is because we have the pneumococcal and meningococcal. Here's the meningococcal vaccine. Here's the pneumococcal vaccine. And those vaccines are against bacteria. And the reason that we have these bacterial vaccines versus where we normally have viral vaccines, that we put so much time and effort into coming up with a bacterial vaccine, is because bacterial meningitis is deadly. It's deadly. It's extremely terrifying. It's one of the scariest things you could ever get, but it's also very, very rare. So bacterial meningitis, it's like 999 to 1 that it's viral and not bacterial, but that 1% that it might be bacterial is why we treat meningitis. We'll treat with broad spectrum antibiotics and then test and see what it is, because bacterial meningitis is so deadly. So here most common is viral. So I don't want you to know any of these either. Just know most common is viral. So enterovirus, the mumps, herpes virus, varicella, and usually how these viruses enter into the cerebrospinal fluid is sometimes because the viral infection has progressed, and that viral infection has progressed. There's so many virions, and those virions are attacking different cell types, and it can get into the cerebrospinal fluid, and so a viral is way more common. But virulent is extremely deadly. So strep pneumo, that's our pneumococcal, and then a group B strep, so anything that's not strep pyogenes, Staph aureus, but you don't have to know any of this. Neisseria meningitidis, Haemophilus influenza, monocytogenes, that's Listeria, monocytogenes, E. coli even. So a lot of different organisms can cause virulent bacterial meningitis. And then less common fungal and protozoal. So remember we talked about that Naegleria fowleri. That one is so motile, and it's able to dig through tissue that it can get into the meninges and it can get into the brain. Yeah.
I forget, do these symptoms vary based on what the cause?
Yeah, no, same symptoms. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
What exactly do we need to learn and take away from this slide?
So this one, most common viral, most virulent is bacterial, less common it can be fungal or protozoal. That's what you need to know. But also one thing I do want you to know is systemic symptoms. So symptoms that might be signs that are, so one sign actually that points to meningitis a lot of times is a stiff neck. People will have a stiff neck. But also it can be fever, confusion, nausea, headache, which these are like neurological signs, neurological symptoms. Where systemic, we'll get more into what is called sepsis, that is an infection that occurs throughout the blood that occurs from bacteremia. But we'll get into that later. But that is like fever, malaise, where they feel like they've got the flu. Like flu-like symptoms makes you think it's something going on that's the whole body. Meningitis, this is like neck, confusion, head, fever. It's kind of like head stuff. Okay. So here's viral, less than 1% mortality, very, very small percent mortality. You don't have to know any of this, except I do want you to know you have to lumbar puncture. And then you'll do something called an ELISA, which we don't know what an ELISA is yet, but what an ELISA is testing for are antibodies. Are there antibodies floating around in the cerebrospinal fluid and to a virus or to a bacteria? Is it viral? Is it bacterial? Lumbar puncture, cerebrospinal fluid, ELISA. Viral, there is no treatment. There are IV antivirals that I think they might be doing now, but I think that's kind of new. But so these are the ventricles of the brain that hold the cerebrospinal fluid. And here you can see the cerebral cortex, you can see the swelling and inflammation, and then the cerebral spinal, or usually with what's called encephalitis, like swelling of the brain, it'll close off those ventricles, and those ventricles will look smaller. If there's an infection in the meninges, in the ventricles will look bigger, but that's just a side note. So this is what a CT looks like of the brain, and it shows these ventricles, those are full of cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, most virulent is bacterial. Strep pneumo is the most common, but you just know it's a lot of different bacterial types. High percent, 15% mortality even with treatment with antibiotics. Respiratory, so sometimes it's a progressive respiratory, lymphatic, blood, and then it gets into the meninges. Lumbar puncture, then we can PCR it, Gram-seen it, all that kind of stuff. IV antibiotics. The Hib is that Haemophilus influenza also is the Hib vaccine, pneumococcal vaccine, meningococcal vaccine, and the Hib are all to prevent meningitis. So one thing I did want to bring up that is important is the glass test. I'll do that next, actually. So a lot of the bacteria that we worry about, this is just a review, you don't have to know this, but a lot of the bacteria that will breach the blood-brain barrier are able to form some sort of capsule or slime mold, or they have a thick glycocalyx layer, and they're able to survive in that cerebral spinal fluid because of their protective outer coating. So that's just something, side note. I just thought that was kind of a cool thing to bring back up again as a review. So this is what they'll do a lot of times for meningitis is if your patient has a rash, then what they'll do is literally, this is what they do in the office. It seems very rudimentary, but they'll do this. They do something called the glass test, where they push the glass up against the rash, and if the rash is still there, when the glass is pushed up against the rash, then it's a sign of meningitis. If the bump goes away when you push the glass up against it, then it might not be meningitis, it's a skin infection.
You mean if the color of it goes away?
If the color of it goes away, yeah, yes. Yeah.
Does that work for viral and bacterial?
Yeah, viral and bacterial. If there's meningitis, a rash that doesn't pass the glass test would be a sign that it's meningitis and not something else. Okay. So fungal, less common. Fungal, we do worry about fungal a lot of times with patients who are immunocompromised, obviously, because this is a great review as well. Fungus, they're everywhere. Your patient can try and avoid bacterial infections, try and avoid viral infections because they can wear PPE. They can be, careful about transmission, where they go and what they touch and what they do. But fungal, once somebody gets a fungal infection, it can progress into meningitis. Yes, that's it. Neonatal meningitis. So the bacteria that cause meningitis can also cross the blood placental barrier. I don't want you to know any of this, but it's extremely virulent. 1 in 16 mortality, 1 in 10 deficits from different. E. coli has 20 to 30% mortality even with antibiotics. They can do a vaginal swab during pregnancy. If the mother is a carrier, they'll give prophylactic antibiotics so that they'll try and get rid of it in the mother, even though the mother doesn't have meningitis, to prevent the baby from getting meningitis. Okay, and then less common are protozoa. I just want you to know protozoa that can cause meningitis as well are way less common, but here are those that we've talked about already. We haven't talked about acanthamoeba, but it can cause meningitis as well. Okay, Zika virus. So all I want you to know is what Zika virus is. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to ask you about it at all, but I want you to know what Zika virus is because you'll hear about it in the news, but Zika virus is transmitted by mosquitoes, but also can be, this was something they just learned a few years ago, that it can be transmitted also sexually transmitted, which is super weird, and they don't know why, they don't know how, they don't know what's going on, but it can be sexually transmitted. But why we really worry about Zika virus is pregnant women. So pregnant women, and not very commonly, but 5 to 10% of pregnant mothers with Zika virus, they'll end up with some autoimmune disease or with something called microencephalopathy. Microencephalopathy is where part of this baby's brain is missing. And part of the baby's brain, their skull is malformed and their brain is missing from getting Zika virus while the mother is pregnant. Yeah.
So these sequelae are in the offspring?
In the offspring, yes, yeah. The mother usually is fine, but it's the pregnant neonate. Yeah.
Is the Guillain-Barré where they have lighter colored eyes and wider spaced eyes? Is that what that illness is?
I don't know what it's. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what Guillain-Barré looks like.
Guillain-Barré is like an autoimmune nerve.
Nerve autoimmune.
Yeah, it like eats the myelin sheath.
Oh yeah. Autoimmune against services. Oh, eats the myelin sheath. Oh yeah, that's crazy. Okay, yeah. So it causes autoimmune and microencephalopathy. Just so you know, Zika virus will be in the news for a lot longer, and it will be in the news for, as the climate changes and as places get warmer and we have more extreme temperatures. Then already, even in Tahoe, there's a huge difference in the seasons already in Tahoe. And we have like a longer mosquito season. There's all of a sudden, there's a large population of yellow jackets, and that's not common in Lake Tahoe. So places like in the south where it's getting warmer and wetter, we worry about these things more and more. So polio, we've talked a little bit about polio. So poliomyelitis, and polio is a virus. It's now eradicated in almost every country in the world except the Middle East and Africa because they had this vaccine reversion problem, which was really sad and scary. Neuronal defects. So poliomyelitis is a nervous system disorder, and it causes degenerative defects of the body, even in a child or an adult. So I just put this on here because wild polio cases versus vaccine-derived polio cases. So I've heard a lot of hate talk about people who are anti-vaccine, which I understand. I see both sides. Even though I do get my daughter vaccines and I do get vaccinated myself, I do see both sides of arguments, and I don't think I think always hate is a bad way to ever approach anything, especially because the people who are hating on things a lot of times are also not educated in that what's going on. So like vaccines, for example, I don't want to anti-vaccine you either because I should be promoting vaccines because I'm a microbiology professor and it's not healthy. It's healthy to get vaccines. It's better for the environment, for your community. It's better for you. But I see the other side because there are vaccine-derived cases, and also what they put in vaccines to preserve them, like formaldehyde, mercury. You could look right on the CDC website and say, this is the polio vaccine. Here's all the derivatives that they have inside that. You can look right on their website and see what is inside of every vaccine. So that part terrifies me because, I don't want to be giving my daughter mercury, and I don't want to be giving my daughter formaldehyde. But at the same time, I also don't want her to get measles and die from it, or kill other children in her preschool who weren't able to get the vaccine because they have some sort of allergic reaction to it or something like that. So I see both sides. It's probably important to get our vaccines. Just throwing that out there.
Was there a specific event that's associated with that spike on the right?
Yeah, there was. So a lot of the vaccines also have to be refrigerated, so it's a problem in that area. Also, they give them the cheaper ones, so the ones that maybe went through less testing, the ones that have been on the shelf longer. And then also a lot of times those are Western countries going into countries trying to do a good job, trying to get them vaccinated, but because the vaccines weren't correct, they were malfunctioning, that they actually gave a large percent of the population polio. So now people are terrified to get vaccines, which is understandable. So yeah, I mean, it's a problem, but you don't hear about this in the news. You hear like, oh, these like backwoods people are not wanting to get vaccines, like us Western people who are so great, you know, but the background of it is that they have fear for a reason. And so, you know, we just need to do a better job as healthcare practitioners to make sure that they're getting quality vaccines and keep up with it and make sure that they're, you know, getting the same standard of care that we are. Okay, acute encephalitis. So this is a brain infection. So this is brain swelling, a brain infection, and actually the brain tissue itself. So encephalitis is rare. It's typically viral. A lot of times it will be because of a secondary infection. 40% mortality rate. Lumbar puncture. We will give IV antivirals. We'll do every single thing we can to help save this patient, but it's has a high mortality rate. Acute encephalitis, you can't really have chronic encephalitis, I don't think, but acute encephalitis means like rapid onset, immediate brain infection. Okay, so rabies are from rabid animals. It's a virus. It's worldwide. It can cause slow progressive encephalitis. So slow progressive, I guess that is more, it's not chronic really, but slow progressive brain infection. And so usually it's the puncture site. I got bit by a dog one time when I was in Samoa, and I was like, I hope I don't get rabies. So it's not, you know, rabies is they're rabid, it was just a wild dog. And so at the puncture site, it will spread to the lymph nodes, it'll spread to the bloodstream, and then where it likes to exist is in the salivary glands. So this virus likes to sit in the salivary glands. That's why they say like rabid animals salivate a lot, is because the virus is in the salivary glands, and then it can spread to the brain. So you can do a PCR test. Yeah, there's a post-exposure prophylaxis. So what it is like you're preventing the spread after you've been exposed, and it's an intense therapy. It's like tons of shots, repetitive treatments. It's pretty intense once the patient has been exposed to rabies. So it's a virus. It's a nervous system disorder. It can lead to encephalitis in the brain. So here we have tetanus and botulism. These are our last two, and then we're done. Tetanus from Clostridium tetani. This one, I don't think we had Clostridium tetani as a note card, did we? No. So just know that there's tetanus, tetani, tetanus, those two sound familiar. It forms endospores, scary, right? Clostridium sounds kind of like Clostridioides. It used to be called Clostridium difficile, now it's called Clostridioides difficile. Endospore forming, strict anaerobe. What else do I want you to know about this? So this is why we get a tetanus shot, is to prevent this bacteria. We get a tetanus shot to prevent this bacteria. Actually, what it is it says conjugate vaccine, but I thought it was a toxoid vaccine, but maybe not. Oh no, it can't be because it's DTaP or Tdap, but I thought it was a toxoid, but I guess it's not. So what we're doing is we're vaccinating our patient against this bacteria, and tetanus causes the tonic contraction. And the opposite of the tonic contraction is called botulism. That's when they lose all muscular function. And that's why people use botulinum toxin as a Botox. It's from this Clostridium botulinum. and it's endospore forming, same, it's got a powerful exotoxins. But actually they're using Botox for a lot of really neat things that they're doing now is like people with Parkinson's, people with what is that, like TMJ or things like that. They're using it medically for all kinds of cool stuff now. Cerebral spinal fluid, yes. Does that sound good? Okay. Okay, so I will have you guys go ahead and head down to the lab. If you guys have any questions that you want to work with me here before you go, you're